Before we begin, I ask that you watch the entire video before you comment. There's a lot of context I would like to go over, and I have a lot of complicated feelings about this episode. Based on the reviews that I have seen, I realize that I am in fact in the minority here, and my thoughts on this episode will probably be seen as controversial. I know this video is going to make me the bad guy of the community, and frankly, that's fine. I've seen a lot of success with my previous Helluvaboss and Has-Been videos where I often have major disagreements with a good chunk of the community, and most of the time you guys at least understand my point of view, and another good chunk of the time I end up being right. Instagram. However, before we begin, and speaking of being a bad guy, we have a sponsor. And I'll give you two guesses. This video is brought to you by Raid Shadow Legends. But Stuart, I don't want to play Raid right now. There's nothing new. Quiet, you uneducated alignment denier. Raid has tons of new things, and this month they include the Forge Pass Season 3, which includes a limited edition artifact set. Raid is also offering limited edition champion skins, including these really nice pieces for Madame Cerise. Also, Death Knight's coming! Ultimate Death Knight! Hype! Now is the best time to get started in Raid, and if you click on my link in the description, you'll get unique bonuses worth up to $30, including Epic Champion Tyrell, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill, 1 EXP boost, and 1 ancient shard so you can summon your own champions. And you can get all these treasures using my link in the description. I'm also going to begin this episode review assuming that you've seen all the Helluvaboss so far. That means episodes 1 through 7 and season 2, episode 1. I should specify, of course, that I have no problems with anyone liking this episode. It's a genuinely gorgeous one with lots of great animation moments. It's also straight up just one of the funniest ones. The Stolas misunderstanding is very funny in the sense of how raunchy it actually gets. This is classic ecchi comedy, and of course the voice cast delivers it with the excellence that you've come to expect. But right away, as the episode begins, you can tell that things are just a little bit different, and as it unfolds, I know I wasn't the only one feeling that scratching in the back of my head. Like, this is not a normal episode of Helluvaboss. Everything is just kinda off and just a little bit wrong. I know I wasn't the only one feeling this either. A lot of my friends, once the initial new episode bliss wore off, felt that this episode just didn't hit quite right. If you felt like season 2 just seemed a little bit off to you and you can't quite pinpoint it, this video is actually for you. And if you're just an angry fan who wants to flame me for having the wrong opinion, I ask that you at least hear out my wrong opinion first before leaving your comment. I never have any issues with people disagreeing with me, and I welcome discourse, but if you're gonna just pop in and start angry typing without bringing up any of my points, I'm just gonna heart your comments so others can see how much of a problem it is when fervent fans lash out for no reason. I really don't have a better way of breaking down my points except by going step by step through the episode and beat by beat, and I'll have to explain this almost point by point because if you put all of what's happening into this episode, it's kind of a mess. And if you put any thought into the episode, especially compared to what we've been told before, it does fall apart. This episode starts with Stolas when he was like 10 years old or so, and he was handed his destiny by his cold and distant father as a studier of astrology and prophecy, and he must serve hell by gathering data about the mortal world and their stars. He then reveals that Stolas is now engaged to Stella, and Stolas starts crying immediately, and Paimon takes him to a circus to feel better. They go to the show, and his father notices that Stolas seems to like the worst clown and offers to buy him. Just right away, there's a ton of conflicting information. First, this is an easy nitpick that is honestly the least egregious problem, but I need to ask, why did you make Paimon an owl? In the Goetia, Paimon is described as an old man riding a donkey. I mean, obviously he's a greater demon and he can change his form to suit the situation, sure, but he literally gives so little shits about his own children that he doesn't remember Stolas' name, and he doesn't realize that he's the owl one until well after he manifested himself. Here, play the audio.
Which son is this one?
There's so fucking many.
Stolas, Your Highness.
Stolas! Yes! right. That's the one.
The owl boy.
The order of these events is just weird and kinda off, and it feels like the script needed another draft. Also, the dialogue here implies that he sees his children as an obligation or even a burden, and he's just kinda apathetic to them. Yet he takes the effort to not only to take Stolas to a lengthy day-long activity, he also notices when Stolas has a fascination with Blitzo, and he goes to the effort to buy him because he knows Stolas doesn't have any friends. So I gotta ask, is Paimon a bad father or is he not? I don't think he's that deep here. This is just really bad conveyance, and I don't understand what they're trying to get across with him. Next, we see a moment of Blitzo and Fizzaroli as kids, and they're vaguely setting up, I don't want to call it foreshadowing, because the armless, legless horse reference is just a fact that Fizzaroli lost his arms and legs later. But I guess we learned that Blitzo has a fascination with pirates, which is weird to introduce into season 2 because we've never seen him care about that in season 1. I think on the Instagram he's mentioned pirates a few times, but he's way more interested in horses. Sure. Then Blitzo's father comes in to guilt him into stealing stuff from the royal house so that he could feed his family. After this, the two meet, bond a little, and have a play date while Blitzo steals stuff from the house. Blitzo and Stolas have this bonding moment that's totally taken from Fox and the Hound, like, "We'll always be together, won't we, Todd?" "Yes, we will, Copper." And obviously they're foreshadowing other things, but let's just move on. The decision to make these two childhood friends is just really weird. It's schlocky anime level writing that really limits the setting in hell. It makes the world building seem really small if these two characters met this early in life. Also, this is skipping ahead a bit, but I want to mention that this episode establishes that Stolas is somewhere in his mid-30s. I can't stress how little that actually makes sense from not only a lore perspective, but it's just a bad idea. I should mention that Stolas is mentioned in the Lesser Key of Solomon, which is a real-world book that was written in the mid-1700s, implying that he should at least be a few centuries old by the time the series begins. If he was important enough to be mentioned in this ancient book, where his powers are well established and he kind of understood what he can do, that means by the time the Ars Goetia was written, he must have at least been a few centuries old to be that powerful to be mentioned. There must be millions upon millions of demons in hell. Why mention Stolas if he wasn't already powerful by the time that book was written? And we know that Helluvaboss takes place in the modern age, because we know it takes place at the same time as Hazbin Hotel. Vaggie dies somewhere in like 2012 or 2014 or something, and humans have cell phones and the internet. And we know that Helluvaboss is canon to Hazbin Hotel because the pilot plays Charlie's music video, and they've said it dozens of times behind the scene. You cannot handwave such an obviously bad decision and just go, "Oh, this is Vizzy's universe, who cares?" Because making Stolas 35 severely diminishes his importance in the world that they're establishing. It makes this setting seem really small and way less significant. If demons are considered old at 35, because he mentioned several times in the show that he feels old,
You show your age.
what does that say about your setting? We're gonna come back to this. And this whole childhood friends section is just really painful to watch. I know a lot of my distastes here are personal preference, and for sure, if you want to like this, that's absolutely valid. You're allowed to like it, but it seems a little desperate from a creator standpoint to dedicate such a long stretch of your episode to showing your characters being really young and innocent. It is like begging for sympathy points when you show your characters like this. Also, as fellow YouTuber, I think I'm going to say this right, Heizu Neutral points out in her review, Stolas may have fallen in love at first sight with Blitzo, and if he did, that's a little weird. It's not terribly uncommon for children to form crushes around 10 years old, but personally I interpreted this as Stolas not being sure how to talk to another kid. But if the show was trying to communicate that he formed an early childhood crush, it's not a good look, and it adds a lot to the schlockiness. It comes off as trying too hard to justify their relationship more in the eyes of the viewers. Again, I'll talk about it later, but Blitz and Stolas' relationship was way more interesting before this episode began. Also, this is 100% a funny little nitpick, but this scene right here makes no sense. This scene where at this moment they walk in and they do this little camera spin. There's a moment where two kids are in the center of this magical chandelier or something, and they're standing in the middle, and the camera spins around and they cheer and hoot and holler like they're on a roller coaster. Can you imagine walking in on this as an outsider, seeing these two little psychopaths standing in the middle of a room, looking in opposite directions and laughing like they're having the time of their lives? I mean, me and my buddy Justin did that all the time. It's just a little game we play, I guess. I know it's a trope, and I know it's a nitpick, but God, that's silly. We then cut to 25 years later, and no, I will not let that go. Why did you make him so young? It completely demolishes the song that he sang to Octavia in episode 2. He says the words,
"Now all my stories have been told,
except for one.
Dude, what the fuck are you talking about? You had no stories. You're young by human standards, especially when this scene begins. Because if she's 17, he's gotta be like 20-something by that point. I know I sometimes joke like I'm an old man, but I'm 32 and I still feel like I have a lot of life left to experience. I know a big chunk of Helluvaboss fans are children and teenagers, but trust me, you guys don't know anything about anything. I'm sure this seems like dinosaur age to you, but your 30s are basically a second set of teenage years. Trust me, it ain't that bad, especially if you diet and exercise well. Anyway, we go into the future, 25 years, I guess, and just a bit, we learn that Stolas is depressed, takes medication for it. I didn't know Hell had antidepressants, and is in a blatantly abusive relationship where his wife publicly humiliates him for breakfast. Thanks to this episode, we learn that Stolas is the victim of a devastating relationship, and like, that also contradicts the earlier episode. We learn in episode 2 from Octavia that her parents used to get along okay.
When I was a kid and my parents didn't hate each other.
There's also a very clear picture of the family in their kitchen where they all used to be happy together. The episode takes mention to focus in on this. This is not the same family we saw from episode 2. Stella was obviously a giant bitch. We know this from her blatant prejudice against imps and the lower class. That's fine. You can still have a bitchy person without making them completely irredeemable. There's a moment just before the You'll Be Okay song where the two are sleeping in bed together and they seem at least capable of working together. Their body language and dialogue here doesn't quite demonstrate this level of abuse. They have a loveless marriage, sure, but whatever this is...
What a pathetic fucking man! I like tormenting you.
This ain't it. Believe me when I say there is a massive difference between a cold, loveless marriage and a blatantly hostile one. A loveless marriage is tragic, but before this flashback in this episode, that's the impression that we were given. Even if there were hints that Stella was catty and bigoted and whatever, it doesn't mean that she wasn't capable of love, or at least trying to make the marriage work. This is the difference between a Cersei Lannister and... I can't even think of a comparison this bad. Cersei Lannister from Game of Thrones was a monster, but people were still rooting for her because we understood, one, where she came from, and two, that she had major reasons for acting like this. We believed that at some points she was in love with her brother. I said that. We believe at some points she is capable of love because she cares about her family, her children, and her legacy. She cares a lot about a lot of people, and yet she does monstrous things, and that's a compelling character. This Stella here, none of that. Making Stella this gigantic thunder completely recontextualizes everything we know about this family. One, why was Stolas feeling so guilty? We see him turn his affair in this episode into an absolute Chad moment.
That was the sound of a fucking divorce!
Two, why would marriage be this sacred in hell? Royalty have affairs all the time, especially in the human world, and other demon lords have sex with their servants, like all the time, like Valentino, or, you know, the literal aspect of lust that was publicly playing with his imp in the middle of his bar. The stigma of race, caste, or marriage, or class, or whatever makes sense because we're in hell, but literally no other character seems to care about marriage loyalty, except for Moxie and Millie, but even then we're led to believe from episodes 1, 5, and 7 that they're the exception to this rule and that their brand of love is unusual for a setting like hell, especially since literally all of the other couples and the Aussies Lounge have alternative lifestyles. For example, there's literally a polycule in this club when earlier we heard from the bouncer that the club was for couples only.
This club is for couples only.
It's what?
What are the rules here? Is hell different from traditional Western views or not? 3. How are we supposed to sympathize with Octavia now? She's 17, and you cannot reasonably say she didn't know how abusive her mother was to her father. Stella literally puts in the newspaper that they're having a party at the expense of Stolas. And we even see from this episode earlier that she attempted to slap him and he caught her hand as a moment of like defiance. If he is able to catch her hand like that, it's clear to us that she is used to hitting him and abusing him. Again, the show is confusing on what we're supposed to take as tragic or funny. There is no way a teenager growing up in this house couldn't recognize that Stolas was being mistreated. Every single teenager on the planet knows when their parents are being abused. There is no way that Stella is hiding this well enough that Octavia wouldn't notice. Also, we can't use the excuse that, they're demons and their morality is skewed. We know this because literally all of the child characters have the innocence of human youth, like human children from our own world would have. They are not born evil in this setting, and they are instead twisted by whatever society this happens to be. But it looks like this society isn't even unique to hell. And I'm sure I'll sound like a broken record, but I'm going to come back to this. Later, Blitz is caught sneaking into the mansion. This is also a flashback. Stolas, drunk on absinthe, okay, starts to flirt with him. Blitzo realizes that he could take advantage and starts, but then Stolas confesses that he's really happy to feel passion and want again. Blitzo, with the book in his hands, begins to feel guilty and then fucks him out of pity. Blitzo then leaves the next morning and Stolas has a triumphant moment against his abuser. This is cowardly. I've already done like 3 video essays on this. I've had 2 alignment videos and my essay on the success of Helluvaboss, and I don't mind being wrong about certain things, but this recontextualizes everything. But everything up until this episode made it seem like Stolas and Blitz were in an extremely complicated and delicate relationship that was both simple and yet extremely complicated. The simple part was the transaction. Blitz wants the book. Stolas wants to feel love through sex. They both benefit. Again, up until this episode though, under the surface, both parties had this insidious and very dark edge to it. Both of them were preying on each other, and consequently they were ruining each other's lives while desperately trying to hold on to what makes them happy. And I need to stress that bad characters doing bad things is very, very good drama. And that's what a show like Helluvaboss should demonstrate. Helluvaboss was controversial upon release because it had a problematic, and God, I hate that word, relationship for their main character. The word problematic is frankly unnecessary for an adult show of this nature, but a problematic element in a show like this would be appropriate. I could write a whole video essay on the term problematic, but for the simplicity of this particular video, people use the term problematic when they're talking about the subject matter of a show that is harmful to their audience and teaches morally reprehensible lessons. For example, let's say an insensitive racial depiction on a children's show, or a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle using household objects to beat up bad guys, or Jake Paul openly admitting that he's advertising his merchandise to children and encouraging them to pester their parents. Keep in mind that all of these shows and YouTubers are aimed at children with the intent of entertainment and are often trying to teach a moral lesson of some kind. A lot of care needs to be made when creating children's shows, especially when the mainstream media gets involved, because most Western countries have extremely strict guidelines on what you can show to kids. Helluvaboss, while very popular with younger audiences, is clearly an adult show designed for adults. It has subject matter that is inappropriate for children, and with that, Vivzy Pop and her team have clearly demonstrated that they don't want children and they want to attract a mature audience. They say this literally at the beginning of every episode. There's a big prompt and says, "This is for adults. Children go away." Helluvaboss is not bound by the rules and laws surrounding children's shows because they are an independent project aimed at adults, and they aren't publishing a show on public syndication. This is why shows like Game of Thrones or Westworld get away with showing intense violence and nudity. Their shows are all exempt from the normal guidelines because they are adult shows. Hell, even Castlevania in, I think, season 3 showed 2 rape scenes at the same time. The point is, in the realms of adult fiction, you are allowed to explore darker and more complicated relationships. I would say for the first 4 seasons of Game of Thrones and several episodes of Castlevania are quite good because they're allowed to have this edge and they're not bound by the moral need to cater to children. Before season 2, we are led to believe that this show was willing to show complicated and dark aspects of many adult relationships. All of the other relationships had an edge to them, and Moxie and Millie was the one exception, and they were kind of meant to be the pure and committed relationship. Blitz clearly seduced Stolas, even in this episode. That much is clear. He took advantage of Stolas' vulnerability and stole something that could potentially ruin his life, his book. If he doesn't have his book, his life is ruined.
You know, if you get in trouble, I get in trouble. We don't want that.
The only thing that the show has made abundantly clear is that Stolas' grimoire is not meant for killing humans. It is designed for a completely different purpose in mind, and Blitz stealing that puts Stolas in immense danger. Stolas, in turn, is using a Actually, I do want to talk a minute to talk about caste systems. Many people watching this video are aware of class systems in which people are divided into various social classes based on wealth. If you have very little money, you are considered lower class. And if you have a lot of money, you are considered to be an upper class, and the only real difference between the classes is determined by wealth. Yes, I know there's a million other small determining factors, but for the most part, upper and lower classes are determined by wealth. A caste system is a strict social system where people are segregated into different social classes through lineage and family. The VivziePop universe is most certainly operating on a caste system where different races of demons are separated into different classes, or castes. Imps are the lowly serfs, and they can be bought and sold as slaves. In fact, it's been hinted that gold tooth imps are owned by someone. Hellhounds also seem to be a commodity race and can be bought and sold as well.
Moxie, stop shaking! You're gonna shoot our only hellhound. Wow, I feel so loved here.
Succubus and incubus tend to have social, let's call them service jobs, like pop stars or STD spreaders. And owls, I guess, are royalty. I really dislike that all the owls are royalty. They should have different kinds of demons there, especially since sinners have such a wide variety of different designs. Blitz is clearly part of a very strict caste system, and when Stryker mentions in episode 5 that it was impressive that Blitz started his own business.
Oh, so you're the bold imp that started his own killing biz. Not many imps start businesses on their own. That's pretty impressive, sir.
Oh, yeah, it is. I guess it is, isn't it?
He's saying that Blitz is in direct defiance of Hell's hierarchy by being a business owner.
Scraps and work for bitter sinners who could care less who you are when you could be slaying overlords. Why struggle to run a business that is rigged against you?
He is, despite being bubbling and scrappy, is a relatively powerful member of Hell's economy and social structure. Imps clearly don't make a lot of money, and they're confined to ghettos or poor parts of Hell. Being a landowner like Millie's parents, though, does seem possible, but Wrath does work a little different. They're still doing, like, manual blue-collar jobs, like farmers. Blitz even points out that even Hell's most popular jester doesn't make as much money of him since he started his own business.
I make more money killing people than you do being a cheap-ass robo ripoff of an overrated sellout jester!
My point is, Stolas was clearly exploiting a broken system in order to keep Blitz as what is essentially a sex slave. Granted, he asked for Blitz's permission on the phone when he was in the human world, but this almost made him seem like Stolas was extending him the courtesy of asking for permission, and he only extended that courtesy because he was just hopelessly in love with him. This relationship should be extremely scandalous. Blitz wasn't just poor, he's part of the unclean in the eyes of Hell. Or at least, again, that was the impression that was given in the earlier episodes. Like in episode 7, Asmodeus seems to openly flirt with his imp and no one seems to care, even though the carnival barker from earlier shouts, "Are you sleeping with an imp?" at Stolas. The rules are inconsistent. Why are certain things forbidden for one character, but not another? And please, if you want to explain it to me in the comments, you have to give examples from the episodes directly. You cannot use your headcanon or common sense to explain these complicated situations because the show has demonstrated that it can't even follow its own logic, and the show isn't following common sense either. Asmodeus can flirt with Fizzarali because he's an aspect of lust, then why can't a demon prince do that? And who said they couldn't?
How dare you? What do you think the rest of the Goetia family will think?
If their imp royalty romance is so scandalous, how did Stolas get away with this in the Ring of Wrath?
Especially that sexy little one there. Yoo-hoo, Blitzy.
And my darling Blitzy!
Also, the way the initial seduction of Stolas is presented, it just absolves both parties of any wrongdoing, at least in the eyes of the show, the creator, and the audience. I really don't like this. In making the relationship more innocent, it takes away the interest and nuance of it. 1, if Stolas is in an abusive relationship, absolutely no reasonable person in the audience cares if he has an affair. And don't even try to correct me on this. Not one of you feels bad for Stella in this circumstance. She is no longer a three-dimensional character with flaws. that are reasonable for a setting like hell. She is just a bitchy waffle. Number 2, Stolas was heavily drunk in this scene. We see him tipsy during their conversation, and Stolas is excused in the eyes of the show because he wasn't at his full capacity when he attempted to exploit someone of lower status. If he wasn't drunk, he probably wouldn't have even considered sex being on the table. 3, Blitz had no idea that Stolas was going through an abusive marriage. Stolas himself says it's been over 20 years since they saw each other.
So, over 2 decades since I last saw you. Are you still a circus clown?
And if he knew how lonely Stolas was, he likely would have just openly talked to him. The fact that the seduction worked out in the first place was a complete accident, and again, absolves Blitz of any purposeful wrongdoing. 4, Blitz still stole the book, but in the moment where he had Stolas literally at his most vulnerable, he still gave him what he wanted out of pity. Blitz, in the eyes of the show, was doing Stolas a favor by giving him a night of passion. They turned the show's best, most interesting relationship, full of complex themes of love, destruction, self-fulfillment, and toxicity, into a by-the-books, completely safe comedy of errors that can be totally solved with a simple conversation. In the eyes of the show, neither of these characters have done anything wrong. Stolas was vulnerable and not himself, and Blitz gave an emotionally starved man some much-needed attention. My biggest question I have to ask is, why? Why did you choose to write a story like this in this setting? You set the story in hell, the literal root of all evil, and not once has this show really taken advantage of that setting. According to the show, Angel Dust and Alistair are now older than our supposedly all-knowing demon prince. If children in this setting aren't born evil, why is it so controversial when Moxie and Millie show devoted monogamous love to each other? And if that's controversial, why is Stolas expected to stay loyal to Stella? And if Stolas is expected to stay loyal, why are other imps shown to be polygamous or cucks? Or yet their club that is run by the embodiment of lust is reserved for couples only? Why are we in hell in the first place? Why doesn't this take place in somewhere like California? Is it because you really wanted hitmen to be your main character? Is it because you really like the aesthetic? Why not make them Italian mobsters or Mexican cartel or literally anything else? Again, if you must have this show take place in hell, where almost all of our characters have been fairly reasonable, why is it so controversial for Charlie to want to make people good? And it's not like they said it's stupid that she wants to take them to heaven. It's stupid because she wants to make them good.
What in the 9 circles makes you think a single denizen of hell would give 2 shits about becoming a better person?
A good chunk of the Helluvaboss and Has Been Hotel characters are relatively nice and thoughtful. Even in their worst moments, they have bouts of consciousness problems. The show has absolutely given up in trying to tell an interesting story when it comes to nature versus nurture versus social structure and complicated love. It's absolutely wasted its setting in hell because it doesn't take advantage of age, immortality, or anything like that, and this is just another cookie-cutter show where I'm supposed to root for the cute and fun characters because the writers want me to root for them, and I'm supposed to hate the ugly and nasty characters because they want me to hate them. I've given tons of evidence to explain that this episode has almost nothing to do with what's been given before. It is a complete contradiction of ideas, and it really shows the immaturity of the writing. This show no longer has anything interesting to say to me because I've seen it done better in other shows. I feel lied to, and I'm kinda angry about it. Do you know what this is? This episode is that moment in Frozen where Hans lifts the boat after Anna knocks him into it and he's smiling.
We find out Hans is a bad guy later. This little moment of him smiling like he's a good guy while no one is around is a bit of a cheat in the narrative.
This episode is cheating and recontextualizing everything we know, and it's worse for it. Tell me in the comments right now, what's the more interesting story? A 30-something-year-old father who gets a crush on someone and goes through a divorce? Or an ancient and powerful demon who becomes obsessed with someone? What's more interesting? An assassin from a caste of slaves who finds love in his gilded chains? Or a semi-decent guy who puts out because he feels guilty? What's more interesting? A woman who, while not in love with her husband, finds contentment and joy in the child that they created together, but feels betrayed after centuries of trying to make it work? Or a heartless bitch who cares about nothing except tormenting a guy still trying to figure himself out? There's a whole third act to this episode as well, but honestly, there's nothing much to say about it. Stolas goes through his phone, realizes that Blitz was never into him, and then he has an argument with Stella that legitimately didn't need to happen. We didn't need to see this animated. We learn that Stella feels nothing about the affair and that she uses it as an excuse to bully him further.
I would feel bad if I hurt you, but we both know I didn't do that.
I'm just disappointed. I thought this show was finally ready to start telling more mature stories, and to me this episode seems completely reactionary. I've mentioned before in several videos that my wife and I go to conventions on the regular, and we see that this show is really popular with small children, which that's just bad parents not watching what they're doing, and the show butts heads with the progressive TikTok and Twitter crowd. There are comments all the time that Stolas was a creep and problematic, and defenders of the show were like, no, it's not problematic at all, and both of these sides are completely missing the point, and the fact that Stolas and Blitz were both bad guys is what gave the show its heart and soul. The show was beautiful in the fact that it was problematic. Again, I will compare this to early Game of Thrones, where bad people are doing bad things, but it's immensely interesting and compelling, and you root for the bad people because there's no other good options. But now it seems like the show is no longer interested in showing a complicated, ugly side of society, and is now just making a less edgy Family Guy. Again, if you're not going to show me something raw and real, why even bother with the sex and swearing? If you want good sound messages for children and adolescents and even young adults, just take all that shit out. Kids don't need to see that. This isn't for them. At the beginning of every episode, it says that the show is made for adults, but the writers are treating them like children with how one-dimensional every character is becoming. And again, all of the problems pretty much exist in this episode. Although I would argue episode 7 has some inconsistencies too, but at the very least, it was just carried by the relationship between Stolas and Blitz in it. Part of me wonders, where will the show head later? Will it be revealed that Blitz doesn't actually kill anybody and instead he takes the effort to investigate those he kills? Is this why we saw them fight a cannibal family in episode 1 and kill them? And even though weirdly enough, at the end of episode 1, it's implied that, morality isn't their business is assassination. It doesn't matter.
But guilty and innocent aren't our business, Mox. Killing who we're paid to is our business.
Many fans, including myself, say that episode 4 with the angels is absolutely the worst episode of the show because it has nothing to do with, any of the themes. Did episode 4 happen purely because Helluvaboss wanted to demonstrate that heaven is run by corrupt and horrible people and that will literally gatekeep those trying to spread joy because of a mistake? Ooh, angels are bad and God is evil for creating the system. Careful, you might accidentally become deeper than Final Fantasy II. I just have very little faith in this series moving forward, and I was one of its biggest fans and supporters. I was shouting from the rooftops, you needed to watch it, and I'm still going to support VivziePop. I still will go to sharkrobot.com and buy all of her merch because I really, really want an independent creator to succeed. Stolas is still my favorite character, and he's very funny, and I like seeing him, though I don't think that they're ever going to give him his edge back. And I know they'll never, ever do anything to compromise his character because they really want you to root for him. And for the record, though, casually killing humans in this show doesn't count as edgy. The show uses violence like Itchy and Scratchy uses violence. The violence is very desensitized, and the characters have gone on massive rampages, and it's always been shown as heroic or at the very least funny. Having your characters kill nameless humans doesn't give them an edge. If anything, it comes off as childish. I'm sorry, I know this feels very ranty and all over the place, but I really want to communicate that this episode fails for me on nearly every level, and those that are paying attention, like Dire Gentleman and Nezu Neutral, have already checked out. There are a lot of VivziePop channels out there that are just praising the episode, and they really like the animation and the soft, innocent demons. And again, that's fine. You're allowed to like it. It's still good, but you've gone from great to just pretty good. And hell, I was still laughing my ass off when Stolas was going all horny for Blitz. It was funny. You're allowed to like it. I just really want to express that I feel disappointed. Thank you to the patrons, and I'll see you next time.